Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen, and I'm joined by my podcast partner, Bob Duff, and this is the HockeyDebates.com podcast. And our special guest is Russ Cohen, who's a draft expert, has his own website, sportsology.com, and also works for XFM.
Uh-oh. That's a bad start.
There's been so little hockey to discuss, but we all know that there's going to be a draft coming up, and it's just as big as it always is. And in this case, I think with the players that we have at the top, I think there's a chance that some pretty prominent teams, in this case the Red Wings, who are going to pick no worse than fourth. The Ottawa Senators have a chance to get two players because they own the Sharks pick. There are going to be some impact players available, and I think some teams are going to get some help in this year's draft.
Yeah, no question. And I also think like another factor that could factor in some trades is if teams really do think that the cap's going to stay even, there might be some names bandied about along with picks to either trade up or trade down to try and get some deals going. But there's some players here that could play right away. There's no question about it. I don't think we're loaded with those guys, but I think you got 3 or 4 for sure. And if you're a team up top, you're going to get one. So I think someone like the Red Wings is in really good shape because they're going to get one. It's just a matter of which one and where they go, but they've got a lot of options.
Russ, obviously, we're dealing with something that's never been in play before, where the top prospects didn't get to play the most important games of the season, whether it be the Frozen Four or the World Under 18 or the Memorial Cup, whatever you look at, the junior playoffs. Obviously, that's not going to impact a guy like Lafreniere, but kind of those guys lower down the list that might have made a move with a big playoff. How do you think it's going to impact the draft, say, in the later rounds?
In the later rounds, it will definitely impact it. I think a lot of scouts are going to have to look at players from the previous year, see what they had on them, see how they progressed this year, and that's what they have to go on. I mean, that's it. I know 3/4 of the scouting was done for players this year, but they do like to see them in pressure situations like you're talking about, and now they're not going to see them. Some of them did play in pressure situations last year, but like if you have players like, as an example, Hendrix Leperrier, who got hurt, that kind of hurts. Or if you're a guy like Tim Stützle, who plays over in Germany, you didn't get a lot of views. You got the World Juniors. Maybe you saw some video of him playing for Mannheim, and that's it. I did interview him a couple of weeks ago, and he was bummed that his season was cut short, but he's in a spot where he knows he's going top 5, top 6. So like you said, those guys are in good shape, but someone who's towards the end of the first round, maybe like a Connor Zary, who you're sure is a first rounder, but if things happen, could he go in the second round because all of a sudden the nitpicking and you're picking apart of a player gets to be too much? Sure. I mean, that kind of stuff does go on, and now I think we're going to be even more critical because we're just going to keep looking and picking for the next 3-4 months. I mean, we don't know exactly when the draft's going to be, so I think I'm trying not to, be hypercritical with some of these guys and change my mind too many times. That's going to be the challenge.
Speaking of lost opportunities. I mean, the NHL draft is really about 2022 and beyond. But always there's a couple of players who end up signing and playing immediately. And obviously the two at the top, Byfield and Leperrier, there's a shot they were going to step in the lineup, but they've been unable, I'm assuming, because there's nothing open. There's no gyms for them to work on. They're not going to have the same ability to work out and get stronger as they would have had under normal circumstances. Do you think that will alter what the top teams who take those guys will do with them come the fall?
I mean, it won't impact Lafreniere or Byfield or Drysdale. Those three are insulated from all that. There's no problem there. But could it impact some other players that you feel need to get stronger? Like Lucas Raymond's got a load of talent, and just tremendous skill, but definitely needs to get stronger. Now he's probably losing out on maybe a half a year of getting stronger. I did ask this question to Stützle, and it actually was interesting because he's still getting one-on-one training at a facility. So it does depend where you live and what you have the ability to do. You won't be able to get any ice, but someone like Stützle is still working out and getting stronger. So I think some of these guys will still be able to do that if you have enough pull or enough money to be able to rent out the place and be able to work out like that. So some of them won't matter, but it'll matter to probably the ones where you start getting around 10 or higher, simply because they probably don't have the means that a lot of the other players do.
When you look at last season, and Hughes and Kakko, they had decent years, but they certainly weren't the impact players a lot of people expected they would be. If we end up in some kind of bizarre scenario where, say, we have a 48-game season next season, or say the regular season doesn't start till, who knows, like November, December. We saw this more so in 95, I think, than in 2013 with the two 48-game seasons, where teams decided, let's just leave our first rounder to play another year of junior and not bring him in January and kind of disrupt him. And certainly with a 48-game season, there's even more pressure to win every night, so you maybe don't want a guy in there that's learning the ropes. You think there'll be any teams that will kind of say, if that comes to be, and again, we're dealing with, uncharted waters here. We don't know what's going to happen. But you think teams might think twice about bringing a guy in and maybe giving him another year of development?
Yeah, I think there definitely would be some that they would pull back on. Lafreniere, they wouldn't pull back on. Byfield, they're not going to pull back on. Drysdale, they're not going to pull back on. Somebody like Stützle, they might pull back on. They might say, depending on where he goes, they might say, you know what? Maybe play another year in Germany, because at this point we feel like playing a partial season isn't going to be that beneficial to you. But I think, the first three are going to be pretty okay not doing that. I think Drysdale's on the edge. I watched him play this year live, and I interviewed him, and I think he's got like really exceptional tools on the ice, speed, decisiveness. He could definitely be a top pairing defenseman. He's got the shot, but he also, when you speak to him mentally, he's very mature and isn't worried about teams targeting him, knows when he's on the ice. He's got one of the tougher jobs on the ice. He welcomes that. He welcomes the challenge. I think when guys have that kind of outlook, I think they could still, even if there was going to be a shortened season, still play. So I think it would limit the number, though. Like if I think 6 are going to play in the NHL right away, you might be down to 3 at that point.
Russ, Lafreniere obviously is going to go first, but how much separation is there between him and Byfield? I
think there's a lot. I think, if you're going to make me put it into like points per season, I think it could be 20 points per season. I think, the difference with Lafreniere is nobody has the vision or the passing ability in this draft that he has. And, I'm not going to say it's Crosby-esque or anything, but he's just one of those guys that can make that cross-ice, no-look pass easily. And it's part of his repertoire, and it's not a problem. He's used to drawing traffic to him, and he's used to finding guys open. He's also got a great shot, and his release might be one of the faster ones in the draft too. So he really is a dual threat offensively that way. He's a clutch player that you want on the ice towards the end of the game because he could score that big goal. So he's really different. Byfield is a big guy, definitely can control a game. I saw him a trip where he didn't do well for a couple games, then he has a 4-point game. So the live viewings I had of him, I had to just look at his attributes. And for a guy his size, his speed is very good. He's got that extra gear. He may not be as fast as some of the other guys getting down the ice that moment, but like his hockey speed, when he sees a play, really good. And because he's got that size and because he'll be a center, controlling the middle of the ice is a pretty big deal. And he's already strong and he's already got a great shot. So I think when you look at a guy like Byfield, yeah, he's a really good player, but he might be your 80-point guy where Lafreniere is going to be your 100-point guy. And that's really where I see the difference.
If the Red Wings end up with number 1, and that's certainly no lock, you've got to take Lafreniere, but probably their two best after Larkin. Certainly, their two best players on the team are both right wingers, and certainly in Mantha and Zadina.
Yeah,
You're going to have three guys on the right side, which unfortunately for them, it's kind of like the trap Edmonton fell into all those years when they had the number one pick. The best player was always a center, it seemed.
Yeah. I think you probably can move Mantha to the left wing. I think he's got good size. I think as he becomes more of a veteran, you probably could get away with that to at least alleviate the situation. Yeah, you would love Lafreniere to be a center, but you can't pass up this guy. Even if you have to trade one of the other guys you're talking about to make sure Lafreniere is there, you got to do it, because if nothing else, you're going to pair him up with Larkin, and that's going to be something special. And right now, there's not a lot that's special in Detroit, right? So you've got to start there and really start creating, if nothing else, a first couple of lines of the future. And I think they're on their way to doing that. I think Veleno's close. I think they're really on their way of doing that. Remember, Veleno's a center, so they do have that in the bank, so to speak.
Russ, when you look at the top picks, you have Lafreniere, who is supposed to be a dominant player. You have Byfield, who's supposed to be a scoring center, a big guy. I've heard comparisons to Evgeny Malkin. And then at the number 3 ranking, you have Drysdale, who everybody says could be a top pairing defenseman, a number 1 defenseman. Given that, and then you have the German Stutzel at number 4, will this draft sort of read right down the list just because of the different positions those guys play, and the fact that all of them are considered to be players that are difference makers?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be that simple. I mean, I may be in the minority. I have Cole Perfetti 4. I don't have Stutzel 4. And it's interesting. Stutzel can play center, right? He told me he's practicing at it. He's practicing at faceoffs. But let's be real about the draft. How many guys say they can play center just so they can get drafted higher and never, ever play center? Travis Konechny. We could look at so many other guys that do it and never play center, right? But they get drafted that way, and you start talking about it. I don't think that's the case. But when you look at Perfetti, he is a natural center. He's an extremely smart kid on and off the ice. He is a huge point scorer. I think he came in second or third in the OHL in scoring. He can set it up as well as he could shoot it, but he's also great defensively. Like, this is a guy who plays a complete game. It's funny because when I spoke to him, he is a very smart student, very good in math, and he actually thinks that geometry does help him on the ice, figuring out angles and figuring out plays. But he's got the highest hockey IQ in the draft, I think. And I think that's something where that could be a little bit of an equalizer because he's a center and because he's got the hockey IQ. We've seen some other drafts where somebody has been a perceived reach, like, when Columbus went and got Dubois and they said, we're going to make him a center. We want the center. This is a position where I feel like if a team is thinking Perfetti can be a top line center for them, which I think there's that possibility, they might grab him, even though Stützle might be the better overall scorer. But again, I don't know if he's ever going to play center in the NHL. That's the real difference there.
When you look at a guy like Drysdale, because it's not really a deep draft for defensemen, could that impact where he goes? Might a team that ends up in the top 3 or 4 that needs help on defense grab him just because that's their position of need?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure there's anybody else who's a guaranteed first pairing defenseman in the draft. I really feel like he's the only one. I know in Central Scouting's rankings, Jake Sanderson has shot up the charts, but I saw Jake Sanderson at different times in the year, and he was shaky at the beginning of the year and then great at the end of the year. I think we all have recency bias in us, and if somebody finishes out a season hot, it definitely can affect their draft rankings. But I think Drysdale is on his own island, and I think even if you're a team that isn't perceived to need defense, you have to get them based on what defensemen are worth as currency in the NHL these days. So I'm pretty sure he's going at 3. I'd be shocked if he goes anywhere else. Now, could he go at 2? I mean, I don't think so because Byfield's that good. But again, maybe there could be a trade made or something that changes that. But I doubt it. I think he's going to go 3, and I do think he's on his own island there, and I do think he's a top pairing guy. And If you're a team, you have to get those guys. How often can any team get a top pairing defenseman in a trade anymore in the NHL? It seems like it's near impossible now.
Russ, we're going to let you go, but before we do, there's certainly a Russian goalie that everyone is talking about. I saw you had him at 9. Other people have him at 10, 11 range. Any chance he could slide up and be the X factor in this draft?
He could be. I mean, I think people have him where they have, like, there are some that have him even worse than 9. He's by far the best goalie in this draft. Just the way he can make sprawling saves, just the way he can sniff out scoring chances, the athletic ability. I think people held the World Juniors against him. Got to remember how young he was. Just the fact that Russia made him the starting goalie was unusual because they almost never do that in a tournament like that. He didn't have a great tournament. I get it. And I think some people let that affect the rankings, but you have to remember how young he is. If you want a potential number 1 goalie, this is your guy in this draft. So yes, if there's a team that really needs that goalie, they don't have anybody in the system, and they don't feel like they have any chance of getting him any later in the draft, you might see him go higher.
Well, Russ, we appreciate having you on. Hopefully we can have you on before the draft as well. But thanks for your insight.
Okay, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Russ.
Have you, Russ?
That's Russ Cohen, who's with sportsology.com and appears on the NHL Network as a prospect analyst and really knows the draft. He's been doing this for a number of years. And it's interesting. The goalie we were talking about is Askarov, the Russian goalie. And there's been a lot of speculation that, Steve Yzerman actually has a history with Russian goalies and taking them and making them an important piece to his puzzle on being a successful team. I'm talking about what he did with Tampa when he actually used the draft pick he got from the Red Wings in the Kyle Quincy trade at number 19 to take Vasilevsky. And I remember at that draft, he said that Vasilevsky would end up as one of the top goalies in the league. And he was right about that. And he's one of the reasons why the Tampa Bay Lightning are, a Stanley Cup contender. I mean, he is one of the top goalies and plays at a high level. The problem, Bob, is he's too far down the list. Like, I think, Steve Yzerman certainly trusts his instincts. He's very aggressive in the draft. Morris Snyder was not ranked where he picked him at number 6. But I think this is different. I think it's too Askarov is down in the 9, 10, 11 range, and I don't think he's going to pick him if he's at 4th.
No, but I wonder if he would – suppose they have bad luck on lottery day or lottery tournament, however they decide to pick who gets the first overall choice, and they end up, say, 4th. Would he entertain the notion of trading down if he could pick up switch first-round picks and pick up a roster player who could help him? If he could trade down to maybe 8 or 9 and take Askarov there, that's what I wonder about it. If they don't see anybody they absolutely love at 4th overall that they think is going to be a difference maker for their team, and he thinks Askarov. I mean, you look at their goaltending right now; they don't have an A-level 5-star goalie prospect, or certainly a goalie on their NHL roster that has a long-term future. So that's, they again have multitude of needs they have to address, but that's definitely one of them. They don't have a goaltender, and a really good goalie can cover up a lot of other issues.
Yeah, we talk about those kind of trades all the time, but they don't happen that often. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, because I bet that I agree with you, Bob. I think that Yzerman would explore that, but they don't. It's not like the NFL where we have those kind of trades all the time, where you trade down and you pick up an extra first-round pick and then a second. We just don't see that. We do see going down from 22 to 24, and we see 18 to 20, but we rarely see a pick in the top 5, going down and doing that. And I'm not sure why that is, but you just don't see it as frequently. And I just think from the Red Wings perspective, since they are the last place team, I think it would be hard for them to pass on any of those top 3 players. Byfield, and Russ explained what a catch he could be and he's going to be somewhere between Sean Couturier and Malkin. That's a pretty good range. I think you'd be pretty happy if he's one of those type players. And Drysdale, everybody tells me, is the number one defenseman. So if that's the case, now all of a sudden, which is one of your most glaring weaknesses, is your defense. Now you've got Morris Seider, and you've got Hronek, who's proven he can play. And to me, was impressive this season. In my opinion, he was one of their better players. And then you've got Gustav Lindstrom, who came up and performed pretty well. Looked like a guy that was going to be in the NHL for a while late in the season. And then you've got McIsaac. And, he's going to play in the league, it appears. So, and I know they're high on a couple other guys. So all of a sudden, if you can get Drysdale, suddenly you're going, wow, we've got a defense. Now we've just got to get some forward. So, I don't see Steve Yzerman moving outside of those top three players. But I think if he gets to 4, I think all bets are off.
As Russ noted, with the cap potentially becoming a major issue, depending on how things play out, if a team has to unload a pretty good player just to make some salary room, Yzerman, and I think it has to be a perfect storm. If he falls to 4, and then some team needs to get rid of a pretty good hockey player because they have cap issues, and they are willing to flip first-round picks, and they're in, say, the 9-10 range where you could take Askarov. It's a lot of maybes and ifs, and they have to be the perfect storm, as they call it. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, but it's still a remote possibility.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Anywhere in the top 3, I think they're totally content. And at 4, then Yzerman starts to say, what are my options? Where do I go? The team I'm most excited about is the Senators. It's amazing to me. Here we were all poking fun at the Senators. Just that, this poor team, they've got an owner that nobody wants to be an owner. He said the wrong things a few times and really has not helped his team in certain situations. They lost Daniel Alfredson, they lost Carlson. They've just had some bad things kind of go their way, and they looked like they were down and out. And now all of a sudden you're going, boy, they're going to suppose they end up with 2 of the top 3 and end up with Drysdale and Byfield, or maybe they get lucky and win the lottery and get Lafreniere and Drysdale, and they've got Shabbat, they've got Kachuk. Like all of a sudden you're looking at a team going, I like that team that as a team that has a lot of foundation blocks to build on.
Yeah, and you look at the Rangers, who did the same thing, moved out some pieces and got a lot of first-round picks. I think they had 6 or 7 first-round picks in a 4-year span. And now you look at the talent pool they have of young players and are a team that looks, if this season had played out, was going to be right on the cusp of being in or out of the playoffs. And, how could Ottawa make a jump like that in a year or two and be that kind of team that's right there again? I think that's where the Wings have kind of, I don't want to say missed the boat, but they've kind of half-baked with this, adding draft picks. They've added a lot of draft picks, but they've not added any more first-round picks. And I think you got to, when you're in a dire situation like Ottawa and Detroit, you've got to add those first-round picks because that's where you're going to get a difference maker. You're not going to find a difference maker in the second or third round. You can find some good players, but very rare you're going to find a guy that's going to become an elite player.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And, the one thing, let's look at you brought up the Rangers, and let's look at the Rangers and the potential Senators rebuild and then where the Red Wings are at. And, it's interesting. It was just a couple of years ago when the Rangers made a pretty public announcement of a rebuild, sending out letters to their season ticket base, standing up at a podium with the Madison Square Garden logo behind them. And I know at that time, talking to general managers around the league who didn't much like that saying, oh, come on. You were barely out of the playoffs And it just seemed like to raise the white flag at that point, like you were sort of embracing the idea of that, if you can't win it all, you got to strip it down to the chassis and start over again. Kind of the Maple Leafs, and if you remember when the fans in Buffalo were trying to get Connor McDavid and all that kind of stuff, and they didn't much like it. But now you look what happened is they've turned it around quickly, and one of the reasons they've turned it around quickly is, they were able to go out in the midst of this rebuild and convince Panarin, or Timmy Panarin, to come and play with them. The top free agent, a terrific player, a consistent scorer, and he came even though they were rebuilding. Now, obviously, they paid him a lot of money. But I don't care how much money the Ottawa Senators or the Detroit Red Wings right now would give a free agent. They're not coming to Detroit or Ottawa. Madison Square Garden, New York is just a different animal. Like, even in the midst of rebuilding, players want to come to New York because it's New York. And I think that's an advantage that the Rangers have had during this rebuild. Now, if the Red Wings turn the corner a little bit and start looking like they're headed in the right direction, I think people will want to come to Detroit and play in that great arena and play for Steve Yzerman. But I'm not sure Ottawa's ever going to be able to reach that. That's not a destination that players say, I got to get to Ottawa. It just happens that they're just not. Occasionally there's a couple of guys that they're from there, or there's something about it they like. But as a general rule, people aren't in a rush to go to Ottawa.
Another thing that concerns me about Ottawa, and we talked about it last week, about a KHL team having to shut down because of the loss of revenue that's the coronavirus shutdown is causing them. Certainly, people like to reminisce about the original six, but the original six is kind of a misnomer, because in the 1920s, the NHL was a robust 10-team league with 2 divisions. Salaries were unbelievable, prorated, of course, when you look at what they make today, but what they were making back then compared to what the average person was making was astronomical. And it looked like, the NHL was in this wonderful, it went from kind of a regional league to a booming major league with big money, and big cities like New York and Chicago and Boston and Detroit came in. And then the Depression hit, and one by one, teams started dropping out. And the first team that was really devastated by it was the Ottawa Senators. Like, they were the first NHL powerhouse. They won 3 Stanley Cups, I think, in the first 4 or 5 years of the league. And they had to start first to survive selling off their top players. And that didn't work. And they ended up just disappearing. And you wonder, if we have, we don't know how long this shutdown is going to last. We don't know how the economy is going to be hurt. There is speculation we could hit another depression. And you just wonder, in the long run, can a small market like Ottawa survive?
Well, don't you think, and I obviously don't know the answer to this, but don't you think that the NHL, in conjunction with the Players Association, will do exactly what the U.S. government did by creating a stimulus package? I would assume that Gary Bettman and the owners would put together a package to sort of help each other, the stronger markets helping the weaker, through what could be a 2-season issue. Like, I got to believe by season 3, this season and next season could be impacted by this, but eventually we'll get a vaccine, and then I think we'll kind of sort of go back to normal. So, it's probably going to take, at worst, the 3rd season. Don't you think the NHL would sort of come together, and just like they did when the currency issue, when they helped the teams that were having currency issues, that they would step in and help the teams who were having the most trouble during the virus pandemic?
Well, what gives me hope that they'll be on that wavelength is I was talking to an NHL executive this week, and he told me there are daily conference calls with the league, all the teams in the league, every day, to go over this situation, because it is a thing that changes on a daily basis. We get new information, we get new developments. So the league seems to be being very proactive with its teams to make sure, everybody's in the loop and everybody's on the same page and they all understand just what the situation is. So that gives me hope that they are going to do everything in their power to make sure that no team is kind of left on an island to float away.
Well, before we go, the one thing I would want to bring up, I've talked to some general managers this week because I was working on sort of a draft piece, and I did ask them how long they thought that the training camp would need to be held, but prior to being ready to play. And I've been just assuming it would be 11 days to 14 days, but the majority of them thought it would be 3 weeks. That they were going to need 3 weeks to get everybody back and probably play a couple exhibition games. So for whatever that's worth.
How long has it been? It's been over a month now since they've all been on skates.
Well, that's the issue. There's nothing, and the GMs all brought that up. There's nothing to simulate, being on skates. If you're a football player, you can go out and run, but there's nothing you can do to simulate that. And there's the issue too that the veteran players have gyms in their, the homes. If they've been there 6-7 years, young players are just living in similar to apartments, similar to living in a Marriott. They don't have those gyms available. So anyway, as usual, time has just gotten away from us. We've gone beyond our 30 minutes, and we appreciate you listening. We'll be back next week, and hopefully we're getting, maybe we'll have turned the corner on this. They're saying April 6th in America could be the peak of the virus, and then maybe we'll start heading downward. We'll see.
All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll be back with you again on Monday.